Summer 1944. The war was turning, though few inside Germany dared say it aloud. At the Luftwaffe's top-secret testing ground in Rechlin, engineers gathered around something extraordinary, a captured American P-51 Mustang. Painted in German crosses, gleaming silver beneath the July sun, the fighter sat quietly on the tarmac. Its new code read T9+HK, though the men around it whispered another name, the American Ghost. They expected mediocrity. To them, the Mustang was an industrial curiosity, a mass-produced brute from a nation that built refrigerators and trucks, not artful flying machines. But when the test pilot throttled up and the Packard Merlin roared, something changed. The aircraft lifted, turned, and flowed through the air with impossible grace. Within minutes, the pilot's radio crackled through static. "This isn't crude. This is perfect." That single flight would wound German pride deeper than any bomb. Because in that cockpit, they realized America hadn't just built a fighter, it had built the future of air combat. It sounded almost comical, Wanderzirkus Rosarius, Rosarius's traveling circus. But behind that strange name was one of the most secretive and technically advanced programs in the Luftwaffe. Led by Theodore Rosarius, a veteran test pilot and engineer, the circus wasn't made of clowns, it was made of captured enemy aircraft. P-47 seconds, Spitfires, B-17 seconds, even a few P-38 seconds. These planes had been shot down, repaired, repainted, and turned into flying laboratories. Their mission, to understand the enemy. To fly their machines, to feel their strengths and weaknesses, to brief German squadrons on how to fight them and how to kill them faster. Every few weeks, the traveling unit would visit operational airfields across occupied Europe. They'd demonstrate Allied aircraft to stunned German pilots. Imagine the scene, a Spitfire or Mustang landing beside Fokker-Wulfs and Messerschmitts. Crowds of Luftwaffe mechanics and young aces surrounding it, eyes wide. But behind the novelty lay fear. Because every captured aircraft told a story of a machine that could outfly, outclimb, or outlast theirs. The Germans took pride in precision. Their aircraft were hand-built masterpieces, elegant but fragile. The Allied machines, though less beautiful, were often smarter, tougher, and terrifyingly efficient. So when word spread that an intact P-51 Mustang had been recovered, Rosarius ordered it sent immediately to Rechlin. They expected another study in American overconfidence, metal and rivets, without refinement. What they got was a lesson in humility. The Mustang that arrived at Rechlin in the summer of 1944 was battered but intact. Shot down over France, it had belly landed in a field and was quickly seized by a German recovery unit before Allied forces could reach it. Its markings were stripped, its body polished, and soon the once proud star and bar was replaced by black Luftwaffe crosses and the yellow underbelly of test aircraft. The new code painted on its tail read T9+HK. At first glance, the engineers laughed. They called it the American tractor, too simple, too crude. The cockpit layout seemed overly generous. Switches were big and labeled, even color-coded. "An airplane for factory workers," one engineer sneered. But then they opened the engine bay. The laughter stopped. Inside sat a Packard-built Merlin engine, a near-perfect copy of Britain's Rolls-Royce power plant, except it was manufactured with such precision and repeatability that the Germans were stunned. No hand-tuning, no artisan adjustments, just exact, repeatable engineering, the kind you could make by the thousands. When they checked the wing joints, they found interchangeable panels. The hydraulic lines were simple to trace, every access panel smartly placed. The entire airplane seemed designed not for elite craftsmen, but for ordinary mechanics to service under field conditions. One German report later described it bluntly: "We over-engineer for excellence, they engineer for victory." And so the Mustang, once dismissed as crude, became the most anticipated test flight at Rechlin. Theodore Rosarius himself authorized the trial. As dawn broke over the airfield, mechanics wheeled the silver fighter to the runway. Its long fuselage caught the sun like polished steel. A Luftwaffe test pilot, Hans-Werner Lerche, climbed into the seat, adjusted his harness, and took a long look around the cockpit. "Too comfortable," he muttered. "This feels like cheating." He pushed the throttle forward. The Merlin growled to life. The Mustang rolled down the runway, tail lifting gently, its wide undercarriage steady even over Rechlin's uneven surface. Lerche had flown everything, the Beef 109, the Fourth 190, even early jets. He knew how to handle raw power, but the moment the P-51 left the ground, he knew this was different. The stick felt alive, yet calm. The wings bit into the air without a tremor. He banked left, and the aircraft seemed to anticipate him. There was no lag, no fight, no twitch, just fluid, seamless motion. He tested a climb. The Mustang responded like a hawk, not a machine, smooth, balanced, confident. Then came the dive test. Lerche pushed the nose forward, the altimeter spinning fast. In a German fighter, the control surfaces would stiffen, the pilot would fight the stick to pull out. But not the Mustang. Even at terrifying speed, it remained responsive. The airflow stayed laminar. The control harmony was perfect. He radioed down, "The Americans have built a pilot's airplane, not a soldier's, a pilot's." Back on the ground, the engineers gathered around him. He pulled off his helmet, eyes wide, breath short. "This thing," he said, tapping the fuselage, "it forgives mistakes. It wants to fly. I've never felt anything like it." That single report sent shockwaves through the Luftwaffe command. Here was an aircraft that ordinary American pilots, barely trained farm boys, as the propaganda said, could master and dominate with. The Mustang wasn't the fastest, nor the most agile on paper, but it was balanced, predictable, effortless. And that, Lerche realized, was its greatest weapon. He later wrote, "The Mustang behaves like a well-trained horse, obedient, strong, yet gentle in hand. It is a masterpiece of harmony." Rechlin's engineers began to whisper among themselves. If this was what the Americans were mass-producing, then the war in the skies was already lost. The German engineers had expected an average power plant, perhaps a noisy, overworked engine with the typical American brute force approach. What they found inside the Mustang was something almost poetic in its balance. The Packard V1650 Merlin, an American-built version of Britain's Rolls-Royce engine, combined British design genius with Detroit's industrial precision. The irony wasn't lost on the Luftwaffe. The heart of the Mustang was British, but its soul was American efficiency. When the Germans disassembled it, they couldn't believe what they saw. Each part was perfectly machined, cleanly labeled, and astonishingly uniform. Where German DB605 and Jumo engines needed careful, artisanal assembly, the Packard Merlin could be bolted together in minutes by workers on a production line. That alone shocked them. Germany's pride had always been its craftsmanship, master mechanics, hand-fitting parts with microscopic care. But that craftsmanship came with a curse. It was slow, fragile, and impossible to scale. Then came the performance tests. The Packard Merlin ran cooler, longer, and cleaner than any DB605. It didn't demand constant adjustment. It simply worked mile after mile, hour after hour. And then there was its efficiency. The Mustang could cruise for hours over enemy territory, escorting bombers deep into Germany, a feat the Luftwaffe couldn't dream of matching. The DB engines guzzled fuel, the Mustang sipped it. One German engineer, stunned by the data, wrote in his report, "The American engine is not superior in power, it is superior in purpose. It is built to survive the war, not to symbolize it." At high altitude, the Mustang supercharger made it a menace. Its Packard Merlin held power where German engines gasped thin air. That meant P-51 seconds could hunt bombers and fighters at altitudes where Messerschmitts were barely hanging on. For years, the Luftwaffe had mocked Allied technology as crude and mechanical. Now they realized it was mechanical mastery. The Mustang's engine wasn't just a technical advantage, it was a philosophical one. Germany, built for performance, America built for permanence. And in total war, permanence wins. When the test results came in, the data stunned even the most loyal Luftwaffe engineers. Not because the Mustang was faster, not because it climbed higher, but because of how smartly it was built. Every cable, every screw, every gauge in the P-51 had a purpose, and that purpose was efficiency. The cockpit wasn't a maze of levers like in a Messerschmitt. It was clean, color-coded, intuitive. A German pilot could learn it in 10 minutes. Even the radio system, simple by design, worked flawlessly at long range. To a Luftwaffe engineer, this was heresy. German aircraft were mechanical masterpieces, yes, but also nightmares to maintain. A field mechanic might spend hours tuning a DB605 engine before each flight. The Mustang? It was designed to be fixed fast and flown again. They inspected the control panels and found something that made them laugh, then go quiet. Tiny color labels, red for fuel, yellow for oil, blue for oxygen. A child's airplane, one officer mocked. But when Rosarius asked him to imagine a 9-year-old pilot, exhausted and frozen, at 25,000 feet, suddenly the idea didn't seem childish. It seemed brilliant. The United States had turned warfare into a factory process. Planes like the Mustang weren't built for glory, they were built to work. Each was identical to the next, which meant parts could be swapped without question. One P-51 down, another ready within hours. At Rechlin, an engineer made a quiet remark that circulated in the halls for weeks. Germany builds fighters for aces, America builds fighters for armies. That line captured the essence of the air war. The Luftwaffe still believed in the romantic duel, one man, one machine, one victory. But America had erased romance from the equation. It replaced it with logistics, assembly lines, and precision manufacturing that no nation on earth could rival. By 1944, Germany was fighting for survival with artistry. America was fighting with arithmetic, and numbers don't run out of fuel. The men at Rechlin now understood something chilling. They weren't just losing to superior aircraft. They were losing to an industrial philosophy that made every Mustang, every pilot, every gallon of fuel part of one unstoppable system. As more test flights followed, the tone inside Rechlin shifted. Gone was the arrogance, the mocking talk of American toys. In its place, a quiet, uneasy respect. Hans-Werner Lercher's final report described the Mustang's handling as harmonious and confidence-inspiring. Other pilots echoed his words. They admired the stability, the stamina, the precision of its controls. One Luftwaffe veteran, after flying both the FW-190 and the captured P-51, admitted bitterly, "The Mustang feels like it was designed by pilots who had been to war. Ours were designed by men who thought they'd never lose it." That single line said everything. For all of Germany's brilliance, its aircraft were products of pride masterpieces that demanded perfect pilots. But the Americans had built a fighter that turned ordinary pilots into good ones and good ones into legends. And that realization hit hard. In Luftwaffe debriefings, the engineers no longer tried to hide their admiration. They openly discussed how the Mustang's design philosophy could reshape air combat. They noted its ability to handle damage and still fly home thick, self-sealing fuel tanks, armored seatbacks, redundant hydraulics. Even after taking hits that would cripple a 109, the P-51 could limp home hundreds of miles. It wasn't luck, it was design. Some German engineers quietly wondered, what if we had built like this? What if, instead of chasing perfection, we had built for endurance? What if Germany had focused on simplicity, on reproducibility, on sustainability, instead of endless improvements that delayed everything? But those thoughts stayed whispered. No one dared question the Führer's obsession with prestige projects, the Me-262, the massive bombers, the miracle weapons. The men at Rechlin weren't fools. They saw what was coming. The Allies weren't just winning the air war, they were rewriting the rules of warfare itself. One officer wrote in the margins of his test report, almost as a confession, "We thought we were the future. The Mustang shows we were the past." By the time the Mustang appeared in numbers over Germany, the Luftwaffe was already bleeding out, but the P-51 turned that slow defeat into collapse. Its range changed everything. From bases in England, the Mustangs could escort B-17 seconds and B-24 seconds all the way to Berlin and back. No longer did American bombers fly alone into flak and fighters. Now, sleek silver escorts waited above, diving from the sun like hawks whenever a 109 or 190 dared to strike. At first, the Luftwaffe tried to adapt. They launched early, burned fuel racing to intercept. But the Mustangs simply stayed higher, waited longer, struck harder. Every mission cost the Luftwaffe irreplaceable veterans. Each month, fewer aces returned. The skies over Germany grew emptier and quieter. The captured Mustang at Rechlin became more than just a test plane. It was a warning written in metal. The pilots who had flown it knew what it meant. No matter how brave their men were, how skilled their aces, or how advanced their prototypes, they couldn't fight physics, fuel, and factories. The P-51 was the embodiment of Allied reach, a symbol of an enemy that could come from anywhere, stay as long as it wanted, and leave untouched. Its Packard Merlin purred where German engines strained. Its pilots crossed whole continents on a single tank. Its factories replaced losses faster than the Luftwaffe could count them. A German flight commander summed it up bitterly after reading Rechlin's full report. The Mustang is not an airplane, it is a system. And systems win wars. By early 1945, the Luftwaffe had all but ceased to exist. The men who once laughed at the idea of American craftsmanship now looked to the sky and saw rows of glinting Mustangs, an armada born from the very machine they had underestimated. Even Hitler's last gamble, the jet-powered Me-262, came too late, too few, and too fragile. Meanwhile, the Mustangs flew everywhere: Berlin, Dresden, Munich, even Prague. The symbol of industrial America had become the executioner of the Luftwaffe dream. At Rechlin, the captured P-51 was grounded permanently, not because it was unfit to fly, but because it had made its point. Its final takeoff had already written the Luftwaffe's obituary. When the war ended, the airfields of Germany fell silent. Rechlin's hangars stood empty, the great Wanderzirkus Rosarius disbanded, its captured aircraft abandoned to dust and memory. But among those machines, one stood out. The P-51 Mustang, still gleaming faintly under the dim light, its German crosses flaking away to reveal the faded American star beneath. Hans-Werner Lerche passed by it one final time before leaving the base. He paused, resting his hand on the cool metal of the fuselage. He'd flown it only a handful of times, yet it had changed the way he saw the war and perhaps the world. He later wrote in his memoirs, "It was not that the Mustang was perfect, it was that it was enough to win the war. Enough to prove that simplicity and purpose can triumph over genius and pride." In those words lay the heart of the Luftwaffe's tragedy. Germany's engineers had pursued elegance aircraft that demanded excellence, precision, and a touch of art. America pursued endurance machines that could be built, flown, and replaced by the tens of thousands. The captured Mustang at Rechlin didn't just show the Germans a new airplane, it showed them the end of an era. From that moment on, air power would never again belong to the artisan. It would belong to the assembly line. And so the Mustang, born of British design, powered by American industry, and tested by German hands, became more than a fighter. It became a mirror. In its reflection, the Luftwaffe saw its own brilliance and its fatal flaw. Because in the skies over Europe, the age of the master craftsman had ended, and the age of the machine had begun. If you found this story as haunting as we did, there's another one you'll want to see next, when German engineers tested the captured Thunderbolt and realized they were fighting a nation that built aircraft like it built refrigerators, practical, unstoppable, and everywhere. Click here to watch that next.